Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not just talking about history, we're stepping into it. We're standing in the soft dawn light of 1843 beside a wooden-covered wagon in Independence, Missouri, about to begin one of the longest and quietest journeys in Oregon Trail history. No dramatic battles, no loud speeches, just wheels turning slowly across endless grass, rivers whispering against wood, campfires breathing in the dark, and the steady rhythm of a life carried west 1 mile at a time. This is what it was really like to live on the Oregon Trail. Not the myth, not the legend, but the slow, human, deeply ordinary reality. A journey measured in flour and bacon, in creaking axles and silent landmarks, in routine so steady it becomes a kind of sleep meditation. For weeks, the view does not change. For months, the wheels do not stop. The prairie stretches like a sea. Chimney Rock rises like a giant asleep. The wagons form circles of safety at dusk, and finally, the valley opens and the wheels fall silent. This is boring history for sleep at its finest. Relaxing history, a calm history story designed not to excite you, but to gently carry you toward rest. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes. Let the prairie wind soften. Let the wagon wheels slow. And let's begin.
Imagine standing in Independence, Missouri in the spring of 1843, not with fear, but with a quiet sense of order. The air is cool, almost gentle, and the town hums softly beneath a pale morning sky. You are not yet moving west. The wagon wheels have not turned. The oxen are still tied, breathing slow clouds into the dawn. And before the journey begins, before the dust and the rivers and the endless horizon, there is something far more important. There is the list. In this history for sleep, in this slow and relaxing history of the Oregon Trail, we begin not with danger, but with preparation. The Oregon Trail history that so many remember for hardship was first defined by patience, by numbers carefully written in ink, by families who believed that order could tame uncertainty. A family of 4 needed precisely 600 pounds of flour. Not 500, not 700, 600 pounds measured and weighed with calm attention. 400 pounds of bacon, salted and packed in barrels that smelled faintly of smoke and oak. 100 pounds of sugar, white and crystalline, poured into sacks that would soften slightly in the humid air. 60 pounds of coffee, dark and fragrant, because even in the vast unknown of the frontier, there would be mornings that required warmth and routine. Listen in your mind to the scratching of the pen on paper as each item is checked off. The sound is steady, reassuring. Flour, check. Bacon, check. Sugar, check. Coffee, check. In the world of Oregon Trail history, this list was not merely practical, it was emotional. It was hope converted into weight. Each number carried the promise of survival. Each sack carried a quiet belief that the miles ahead could be endured. Around you, other families are doing the same, measuring beans, counting dried apples, folding spare shirts and heavy wool blankets. The wooden wagon floor waits patiently as the heavy sacks are lifted and lowered. There is a soft thud against the boards as 600 pounds of flour settle into place. Another muted thump as barrels of bacon are rolled carefully inside. The wagon does not protest, it accepts the burden. And in this relaxing history, we pause with them. We do not rush forward to river crossings or mountain passes. We remain here in the slow ritual of readiness. Because living on the Oregon Trail did not begin with motion, it began with intention. The list continues: dried beans, rice, salt, medical supplies, extra wagon grease, spare axles, ropes coiled neatly like sleeping serpents. Every item chosen with care, because space was limited and every pound mattered. Too much weight and the oxen would strain. Too little and hunger would whisper later beneath the wide prairie sky. The mathematics of survival was delicate. In this history for sleep, you can almost feel the balance being calculated in silence. Fathers lift, mothers measure, children watch quietly, sensing the seriousness in the air, but also the strange calm. There is no shouting, only the rhythm of preparation. In the broader story of Oregon Trail history, we often focus on the dramatic, the storms and sickness and loss. But here, at the beginning, there is something deeply human. A family standing in a small Missouri town, believing that careful planning can shape destiny. As the pen scratches across the final lines of the inventory, there is a pause, a breath. The paper is folded and tucked away. The wagon now holds not only food and tools, but expectation. In this relaxing history, in this gentle retelling of life on the Oregon Trail, we start with weight, with flour and bacon and sugar and coffee, with numbers that feel solid beneath the fingertips. And as the sun climbs higher over Independence, Missouri, the list rests complete, and the journey waits patiently from morning to fully awaken. The list is complete, but preparation does not end with ink drying on paper. In this quiet chapter of Oregon Trail history, in this gentle history for sleep, the true meaning of the list begins to settle into the wood and iron of the wagon itself. The sun has risen higher over Independence, Missouri, casting long golden lines across the wagon yard. Dust drifts lazily through the air, illuminated like tiny floating stars. And now, the weight of hope must be arranged carefully, thoughtfully, almost tenderly. 600 pounds of flour cannot simply be thrown inside. It must be distributed so the wagon remains balanced. The heaviest sacks rest low and centered, forming a foundation. 400 pounds of bacon in sealed barrels are rolled slowly into position, cushioned with folded blankets to prevent cracking as the trail jolts beneath wooden wheels. 100 pounds of sugar are tucked away in tight corners, protected from moisture, as if sweetness itself requires safeguarding. 60 pounds of coffee are placed within reach, because routine will matter when the prairie feels endless. In Oregon Trail history, survival was not chaos. It was arrangement. It was geometry. It was quiet intelligence expressed through placement. Listen again in this relaxing history to the small sounds. The creak of timber as weight shifts, the soft rustle of canvas covers being adjusted, the metallic clink of tools laid beside spare wagon parts. An extra axle is secured. A small barrel of water is wedged firmly between crates. A rifle, cleaned and wrapped, rests carefully along the wagon's side. Each item has a space. Each space has purpose. Living on the Oregon Trail meant understanding that disorder could cost lives, and so preparation became a ritual of calm control. Nearby, oxen stand patiently, their large eyes reflecting the morning light. They do not know about flour or sugar or the mathematics of 2,000 miles. They only feel the tightening of harness straps and the quiet determination of human hands.
Children move more softly now. They sense that this moment is significant. A small wooden doll is slipped discreetly into a trunk beside quilts. A family Bible, its leather worn smooth, is placed carefully atop folded clothing. The inventory was never just numbers. It was identity. It was memory packed between barrels of bacon and sacks of beans. In this history for sleep, let your mind slow with the rhythm of deliberate action. Imagine the father stepping back from the wagon, studying its balance the way a captain studies his ship. Imagine the mother running her fingers over the final arrangement, silently calculating meals, days, distances. In Oregon Trail history, the journey west was often described as brave, but bravery here looks quiet. It looks like checking knots twice. It looks like ensuring that 600 pounds of flour will not spill when the wagon tilts crossing a riverbank. It looks like recognizing that 400 pounds of bacon are both sustenance and security. The numbers become companions. They carry reassurance. The town around them hums with similar activity. Dozens of wagons line the streets, each holding its own version of hope measured in pounds and barrels. This was the true beginning of life on the Oregon Trail. Not movement, but readiness. Not motion, but balance. The list has become a structure, and the structure has become a promise. The prairie beyond Missouri remains invisible for now, but its presence is felt in every tightened rope and secured crate. In this relaxing history, we linger in this fragile stillness, because soon the wheels will turn. Soon dust will rise behind them. But for now, there is only breath. There is only weight. There is only the steady certainty that preparation, measured carefully in flour, bacon, sugar, and coffee, is the quiet architecture of survival.
Evening settles gently over Independence, Missouri, and the wagons rest in quiet rows beneath a sky turning from pale gold to deep blue. In this final stillness before departure, in this slow and relaxing history for sleep, we arrive at the last night of preparation along the Oregon Trail. The inventory is complete. 600 pounds of flour sit balanced and secure. 400 pounds of bacon rest in salted barrels. 100 pounds of sugar wait in careful storage. 60 pounds of coffee promise mornings yet to come. And yet, on this night, the numbers feel different. They no longer represent tasks to complete. They represent a threshold about to be crossed. Lantern light flickers softly against canvas and wood. The oxen chew quietly in their enclosures, unaware that tomorrow they will pull not just weight, but intention across the plains. In Oregon Trail history, this final evening before departure was often more emotional than dramatic. There are no speeches, no declarations, only small, intimate gestures. A father tightens one last strap on the wagon, his hands steady but slower than before. A mother folds an extra blanket and tucks it beside the family Bible. A child traces a finger along the wagon wheel, memorizing the texture of wood grain as if sensing that life is about to widen beyond recognition. In this history for sleep, let yourself feel the softness of that moment. The town sounds different tonight. Footsteps are quieter. Conversations are hushed. The usual rhythm of commerce fades into a collective awareness that dozens of families stand on the edge of something immense. Oregon Trail history often focuses on hardship and endurance, but before endurance came reflection. Before rivers and mountains came this quiet pause. Inside the wagon, the arrangement remains untouched. The geometry of survival holds steady. Flour low and centered, bacon secured, sugar protected, coffee within reach, tools aligned with care,
spare axles lashed firmly in place. The list has transformed into structure, and the structure now feels almost like a promise whispered into the dark. As night deepens, a soft wind brushes across the yard, nudging the canvas covers with a gentle rustle. The stars appear slowly, one by one, over Missouri. For some, this may be the last night beneath a familiar sky. For others, it is the first step toward imagining a new one. Living on the Oregon Trail did not begin with movement at dawn. It began with surrender to uncertainty during this final night. In this relaxing history, allow your thoughts to drift alongside theirs. Perhaps they wonder about the 2,000 miles ahead. Perhaps they calculate once more whether 600 pounds of flour will truly be enough. Perhaps they trust that careful planning, written in ink and measured in pounds, will carry them across rivers and deserts. A quiet meal is shared beside the wagon. Nothing extravagant, just bread, maybe a slice of bacon, perhaps coffee brewed gently over coals. Familiar tastes linger longer tonight. There is comfort in routine. In Oregon Trail history, this calm acceptance was as powerful as courage. It was not loud bravery, it was sustained belief. A mother kneels beside her child for a final prayer. A father gazes toward the west, though the prairie remains invisible in darkness. The weight of hope now rests not only in flour and sugar, but in hearts that have chosen forward over familiar. And in this history for sleep, we stay with them in the quiet. We do not rush to sunrise. We do not yet hear the wheels turn. We remain beneath the stars, listening to the slow breathing of oxen, the faint creak of wood settling under weight, the distant murmur of other families preparing for the same uncertain horizon. Tomorrow the trail will begin, but tonight there is only stillness, only preparation completed, only the soft understanding that life on the Oregon Trail truly began not with the first step west, but with this peaceful, deliberate night of readiness.
When morning finally arrived over Independence, Missouri, the wheels did not rush forward. They turned slowly, deliberately, as if aware that every rotation marked the true beginning of life on the Oregon Trail. In this chapter of boring history for sleep, we move gently from preparation into motion, from stillness into the steady rhythm of the prairie schooner. The wagon was not just a vehicle, it was a home. And in Oregon Trail history, the covered wagon was less a symbol of adventure than of endurance. Constructed of hardwoods, hickory, oak, or maple, the frame held the quiet strength of forests long before it carried human hope. If you listen closely in this relaxing history, you can almost hear the subtle difference between woods. Hickory, dense and resilient, bearing weight without complaint. Oak, solid and dependable, its grain tight and purposeful. Maple, smoother beneath the hand, pale and almost gentle in appearance. The body of the wagon rose from these timbers like a small ship set upon wheels, earning its poetic name, the Prairie Schooner. And just as a ship must survive waves, this wagon would survive ruts, stones, mud, and distance. The wheels were rimmed with iron, carefully heated, expanded, then fitted around the wooden spokes before cooling and contracting to grip the wood tight. Imagine that process. The iron band glowing faintly from heat, lowered carefully into place, then the slow hiss as water cooled it, shrinking it snug against the wood. In Oregon Trail history, this small detail mattered deeply. Without that iron rim, the wheel would splinter under strain. With it, the wagon could endure thousands of miles. In this boring history for sleep, we linger on that iron cooling, tightening, embracing wood, the faint metallic scent in the air, the quiet satisfaction of craftsmanship.
The axles were thick, practical, not ornate. Everything about the covered wagon was purposeful. Nothing was decorative beyond necessity. And yet there was beauty in that restraint, the beauty of function, the beauty of something built not to impress, but to last. Above the wooden frame stretched the bonnet, a canvas cover arched like the back of a resting animal. The canvas had been waterproofed with linseed oil, rubbed in carefully until it seeped into the fibers. It smelled of earth and oil, a scent that would become the background of every night's sleep. That scent would cling to clothing, to blankets, to memory itself. In this history for sleep, breathe it in gently, earthy, slightly sharp, comforting in its consistency. The covered wagon creaked softly as it began to move westward, the sound not alarming, but rhythmic. Wood against wood, iron against axle, a low, steady groan that soon blended into the soundtrack of daily life. Living on the Oregon Trail meant accepting that this wagon was shelter, pantry, storage, and sanctuary all at once. Children would sleep beneath its curved canvas. Meals would be prepared beside its wheels. Illness would be endured within its narrow interior. The Prairie schooner was not glamorous, it was intimate. It held every possession that mattered and every memory that could not be left behind. As the wheels roll slowly onto the open prairie, the wagon sways gently, almost like a cradle. In Oregon Trail history, this motion would become familiar, even soothing. And in this relaxing history, we begin to understand that the covered wagon was more than transportation. It was architecture in motion, a small wooden world carried across an endless landscape.
As the prairie begins to open wider with every mile, the covered wagon settles into its true identity, not as an object, but as a living soundscape. In this chapter of Boring History for Sleep, we move closer to the materials themselves, allowing wood, iron, and canvas to speak in quiet tones that shaped daily life on the Oregon Trail. The Prairie schooner does not glide in silence. It breathes, it murmurs, it answers the earth beneath it. The wheels turn steadily, and with each rotation there is the low wooden hum of spokes bearing weight. Hickory spokes flex almost imperceptibly, absorbing uneven ground. Oak hubs rotate around the axle in a patient rhythm. The iron rim kisses stone and dirt with a muted scrape that is never harsh, only persistent. In Oregon Trail history, this sound was constant, becoming as familiar as one's own heartbeat. Listen carefully in this relaxing history. The wagon does not roar, it creaks. A soft, elongated groan rises from the wooden frame as it shifts against the stress of motion. Not a complaint, but a reminder of presence. The iron tires, tightened around the wheels, expand slightly under the warmth of the afternoon sun, then cool again as evening approaches, contracting in quiet loyalty around the wood. That tightening, that subtle pressure between metal and timber, held the entire structure together across thousands of miles. The axle turns with a faint grinding murmur, softened by animal grease carefully applied before departure. Each morning, someone would kneel beside the wheel to check it, pressing fingers into wood, inspecting the iron rim, ensuring that nothing had loosened overnight. In this boring history for sleep, such rituals become meditative. The act of touching wood grain, the faint scent of warm iron, the slow reapplication of grease along the axle. Above, the canvas bonnet sways gently with the wind. Waterproofed with linseed oil, the fabric is thick, almost leathery, yet flexible enough to move with the frame. When wind brushes across it, the sound is a low flutter like distant sails. This is why the wagon was called a prairie schooner, not because it sailed on water, but because its canvas crest caught the wind as if the plains themselves were an ocean of grass. In Oregon Trail history, families slept beneath this moving canopy, the scent of oil and dust blending into something strangely comforting. The smell of linseed oil lingered, earthy and faintly sharp, mixing with flour dust and the faint sweetness of stored sugar. In this boring history for sleep, breathe in that scent slowly. Earth, oil, wood warmed by sunlight. Inside the wagon, objects shift gently with movement. A tin cup taps softly against a crate. A folded quilt slides an inch, then rests again. The geometry of preparation we described in the previous chapter now proves its worth. Balanced weight means smoother travel. Poor balance means jarring lurches. The covered wagon rewards care. Living on the Oregon Trail meant listening constantly to these sounds. A sudden sharper creak could mean a loosened bolt. A change in rhythm might signal a cracked spoke. Silence, paradoxically, could be more worrying than noise. In this relaxing history, we allow those sounds to become a lullaby. The steady turn of wheels, the whisper of canvas, the low breath of oxen pulling in front, hooves pressing into soil with patient determination. Nothing here is hurried. Even movement feels measured. The Prairie schooner is not racing toward Oregon, it is enduring toward it. And in the vast openness of the plains, the wagon becomes the center of a small moving universe. Wood, iron, and canvas repeating their quiet dialogue with every mile. In this boring history for sleep, the technical becomes tranquil. The materials themselves hold memory. The iron rim remembers the blacksmith's hammer. The oak frame remembers the forest. The canvas remembers careful hands brushing oil into its fibers. Together, they carry a family west, not with drama, but with rhythm. And as the sun lowers and shadows stretch long across the grass, the sounds soften. The creak becomes slower. The canvas flutters less. The wheels continue their circular meditation. The Prairie schooner, home made of wood and iron, moves steadily forward, and the world seems gently to move with it. By the time evening returns to the Prairie, the covered wagon has already completed its quiet labor for the day. In this gentle continuation of our boring history for sleep, the Prairie schooner transforms once again, no longer simply a moving structure of hardwood and iron, but a resting space suspended beneath a sky that feels impossibly wide. The wheels stop turning, yet their circular rhythm lingers in the body, as if motion has imprinted itself into muscle and memory. Living on the Oregon Trail meant that night did not bring walls of brick or ceilings of plaster. It brought canvas. The bonnet arches overhead, its linseed oil-treated fabric carrying that familiar scent of earth and oil that now clings softly to clothing and blankets. The air beneath it feels warmer than the open prairie, protected from wind by wood ribs bent into careful curves. In Oregon Trail history, this was shelter enough. Not perfect, not silent, but steady. The ground beneath the wagon still radiates the warmth gathered during the afternoon sun. Quilts are unrolled across the wagon bed, layered over flour sacks and wooden planks that earlier carried 600 pounds of flour and 400 pounds of bacon. The inventory that ensured survival now becomes part of comfort. A sack of sugar, tightly tied, serves as a makeshift pillow. A folded coat softens the edge of a wooden crate. In this boring history for sleep, allow the transformation to feel natural. The covered wagon does not resist its new purpose. It receives tired bodies gently. Outside, the oxen are unyoked and allowed to rest, their slow chewing drifting into the night like a steady metronome. The prairie settles into its own soundscape. Grass whispers under a cooling breeze. Somewhere in the distance, another wagon creaks as someone shifts inside. Iron rims cool after a long day, contracting faintly around wooden wheels with barely audible clicks. That soft tightening of metal against wood becomes part of the lullaby.
In this relaxing history, we stay close to those small sounds. A tin cup placed carefully beside a crate, the faint brush of canvas as someone adjusts it to block a draft, the slow exhale of a child already drifting toward sleep. In Oregon Trail history, families learned to trust these materials. Hickory and oak formed a boundary against uncertainty. Iron rims held structure against the strain of distance. Canvas separated human warmth from open sky. The Prairie schooner, once described in technical detail, now feels intimate. Its wooden ribs frame constellations glimpsed through tiny openings. Its canvas holds back dew gathering in the cool night air. The scent of linseed oil blends with flower dust and faint traces of coffee from earlier that morning. These smells become memory. They become the background of every night's sleep along the trail. Living on the Oregon Trail required adaptation not only to terrain, but to closeness. The wagon interior is narrow. Movements must be careful. A shift in weight causes a soft creak. A turning shoulder brushes canvas. Yet within that closeness, there is reassurance. The family remains within arm's reach. In this boring history for sleep, closeness becomes comfort. The prairie beyond remains vast and unknowable, but beneath the curved canvas roof, there is a defined world. Wood beneath, canvas above, iron at the wheels, stars overhead. The Prairie schooner holds its form even in stillness. It is both architecture and cradle, both shelter and reminder that tomorrow the wheels will turn again. And as sleep deepens across the grasslands, the wagon rests quietly, its materials cooling, its structure breathing in subtle expansions and contractions, carrying within it not only supplies and tools, but the steady, measured hope that wood, iron, and canvas can sustain life across an ocean of land.
As the Prairie schooner rests beneath its curved canvas, and the night slowly thins into pale blue, a new rhythm begins to form along the Oregon Trail. In this chapter of our boring history for sleep, we move gently into the daily routine that defined life on the trail, not as drama, but as repetition. The day began not with a shout, but with the sun. It was often 4 a.m. when movement first stirred in the dim light. Officially, the sentries might fire their rifles as a signal to wake, a sharp crack that carried across the grasslands. But in this sleep story, let us soften that moment. Let us focus on the quieter sounds that followed, the shifting of blankets, the faint rustle of canvas as someone pushes it aside to let early air enter, the slow inhalation of a child waking, unsure for a moment where they are, until the scent of linseed oil and wood reminds them. This was the daily routine that shaped Oregon Trail history, predictable, structured, reassuring in its constancy. Living on the Oregon Trail required that the body learn the rhythm before the mind fully did. Someone reaches for the coffee pot. The metal feels cool from the night air. A small fire is coaxed back to life from glowing embers saved beneath ash. Sparks rise softly, not dramatically, but steadily. Soon there is the gentle clink of coffee pots as water is poured, measured carefully. 60 pounds of coffee were packed for a reason. Morning required it. The smell begins to bloom in the air, rich and grounding. Nearby, bacon from those carefully stored 400 pounds is placed into a pan. It sizzles slowly, not angrily, but in a calm, even rhythm. The scent mixes with prairie air, creating something both ordinary and extraordinary. In this history for sleep, notice how the routine repeats. Every morning, coffee, bacon,
fire. The same motions, the same gestures. A parent waking children with a soft voice. Boots pulled on. Hands washed with cool water from a barrel. Outside the wagon circle, oxen begin to stir. Their breath forms faint clouds in the chill dawn. The process of yoking them is not rushed, it is deliberate. Heavy wooden yokes are lifted, positioned carefully across broad necks. Iron rings are fastened, ropes checked twice. This too is part of the daily routine, step by step, always step by step. In Oregon Trail history, routine was the only master here. Not ambition, not speed, but repetition. The same actions repeated until they felt as natural as breathing. In this sleep story, let yourself settle into that repetition. The prairie does not surprise them at 4 a.m. It greets them the same way each morning. Cool air, faint light, the promise of miles ahead. Children learn the pattern quickly. Eat when called, walk when told, rest when the wagon stops. Even the prairie schooner seems to anticipate movement, its wooden frame absorbing the first subtle shifts as weight redistributes inside. The geometry of yesterday's preparation now becomes the architecture of today's motion. In this relaxing history, we do not rush forward. We remain in the comfort of predictability. The century's rifle shot fades into memory. What remains is coffee poured into tin cups, bacon divided evenly, yokes tightened, wheels inspected. The day has begun, not dramatically, not heroically, but steadily. And in that steadiness lies survival.
Once the oxen lean forward and the wheels begin their steady rotation, the day does not rush, it unfolds. In this continuation of our boring history for sleep, we follow the daily routine not as an event, but as a pattern repeated across weeks and months along the Oregon Trail. After the quiet rituals of 4 a.m., after coffee and bacon and the careful fastening of yokes, comes the simple act of walking. Many imagined families riding inside the covered wagon all day, but in Oregon Trail history, most adults walked beside it. The prairie schooner carried weight, not people, so the daily routine continued on foot, step by step, mile after mile. In this sleep story, let us slow down and walk with them. The ground is firm in the early morning, cool beneath leather boots. The grass bends gently with each passing wheel. The oxen move in a patient rhythm, hooves pressing into soil with a muted thud. There is no hurry. The wagon travels perhaps 2 miles an hour, sometimes less. This pace becomes the tempo of life. Walking beside the covered wagon creates its own meditation. Left foot, right foot. The creak of wood, the soft scrape of iron rims over earth, the whisper of canvas overhead. These sounds repeat so consistently that the mind begins to relax into predictability. In this relaxing history, repetition is not dullness, it is safety. The daily routine rarely changes. Walk in the morning cool, pause briefly near midday, continue until late afternoon. Children alternate between walking and riding for short intervals, learning endurance slowly. A father may rest one hand against the wagon frame, feeling the vibration of wood beneath his palm. A mother may count steps without realizing she is counting, her thoughts moving in rhythm with motion. In Oregon Trail history, this pattern was survival disguised as simplicity. By keeping the day structured, uncertainty felt smaller. Each mile completed was 1 mile closer to Oregon, even if Oregon still seemed impossibly far. In this boring history for sleep,
let the monotony become soothing. The sun rises gradually higher, light warms shoulders and backs. The scent of canvas treated with linseed oil drifts faintly each time a breeze lifts the bonnet. Dust begins to gather along hems of skirts and trouser cuffs, but even dust becomes part of the daily routine. No one remarks upon it after the first few days. It is simply there, like the sky. Occasionally, a wagon ahead slows slightly and the line compresses. No shouting, no panic, just the natural adjustment of a moving community. Oregon Trail history often emphasizes danger, but far more hours were spent in these quiet stretches of walking than in moments of crisis. The prairie seems endless, but the rhythm provides boundaries. Step, wheel turn, breath. Step, wheel turn, breath. Inside the wagon, flour and bacon remain secure, balanced exactly as prepared. The geometry of Chapter 1 and the materials of Chapter 2 now support this steady daily routine. The covered wagon becomes almost invisible in its constancy. It is simply there, moving with them, shelter waiting for evening. In this sleep story, allow your thoughts to drift with the pattern. There is comfort in knowing what comes next. The oxen will continue forward, the wheels will continue turning, the sun will reach its peak, a pause will come, and then walking will resume. Routine was the only master here, not ambition, not excitement, but repetition. And repetition repeated long enough becomes calm. By the time the sun climbs toward its highest point, the prairie no longer feels endless. It feels measured. In this final movement of our daily routine along the Oregon Trail, in this gentle, boring history for sleep, the rhythm that began at 4 a.m. completes its quiet arc before beginning again. The midday halt arrives not dramatically, but almost inevitably. Someone at the front of the wagon train raises a hand. The oxen slow. The wheels turn a little less. Then they stop. There is no sudden silence, only a gradual softening. Wood settles. Iron rims cool slightly beneath the steady sun. Canvas breathes as a breeze slips beneath it. This pause is not random. It is part of the daily routine that sustained thousands of miles. In Oregon Trail history, midday rest prevented exhaustion, protected animals, and preserved strength. But in this sleep story, we experience it not as strategy, but as relief. Boots step off packed soil. Hands stretch toward sky. Tin cups are lifted again. Water is poured carefully from barrels that were measured and packed weeks before. The geometry of preparation still matters. Flour and bacon remain balanced inside the covered wagon. Sugar stays dry. Coffee grounds are used sparingly. Even rest is structured. Children sit in the wagon's shadow, their backs against oak planks warmed gently by morning sun. A mother checks a wheel out of habit, pressing her palm against the iron rim. A father studies the horizon, though there is nothing urgent to see. The prairie hums softly with insects and wind. In this relaxing history, repetition deepens comfort. Morning walk, midday halt, afternoon walk, evening camp. The pattern does not surprise the mind, it reassures it. As afternoon stretches long and light begins to soften, the wagons once again slow. Evening camp is not a grand event, it is an extension of the daily routine, as reliable as sunrise. The oxen schooner is guided into position, sometimes forming a loose circle with others. Oxen are unyoked with the same careful steps used at dawn, but slower now. Heavy wooden yokes are lifted away, iron fittings unclasped, ropes coiled neatly. The animals move to graze, their breathing steady and calm. Inside the covered wagon, quilts are shaken free of dust. The canvas bonnet glows faintly in amber light. Linseed oil scent lingers in the cooling air, mingling with faint traces of bacon and wood smoke. Supper is simple, measured portions, no excess. The daily routine governs appetite as it governs motion. In Oregon Trail history, predictability was protection. By repeating the same structure each day, uncertainty felt smaller. The mind could rest inside familiarity even while the body moved through unfamiliar land. In this boring history for sleep, allow that repetition to cradle you. Coffee in the morning, walking beside the wagon, midday rest, walking again, evening camp, supper, sleep beneath canvas, and then, once more, 4 a.m. The cycle turns as steadily as the iron-rimmed wheels. The prairie, vast and indifferent, becomes almost gentle when approached with rhythm. Living on the Oregon Trail was not a constant storm of crisis. It was hours and hours of repeated action, structured time, measured effort. The covered wagon stands quietly now, its wooden frame cooling as stars emerge. Inside, families settle into positions learned through repetition. A child curls beside flour sacks. A parent rests against the curved rib of canvas. Outside, iron rims contract faintly in the cooling air, tightening against oak and hickory as they did the night before. Routine was the only master here, and routine, repeated without interruption, becomes a kind of peace. In this sleep story, the day closes the same way it opened, without drama. Only breath, only wood, only iron, only canvas, and the certainty that tomorrow will follow the same path, step by step, mile by mile, wheel turn by wheel turn.
And then, gradually, almost without announcement, the land changes. Not dramatically, not with mountains rising or rivers cutting across the trail. It changes by becoming the same. In this chapter of our boring history for sleep, we enter the Great Plains, history not as a moment of spectacle, but as an experience of endless continuity. For weeks, the view did not change. It was a sea of green grass, rippling in the wind like ocean waves. The prairie schooner rolls forward, and the covered wagon creaks softly beneath its familiar weight. But the horizon remains unbroken. No trees to interrupt the line where earth meets sky, no hills to offer perspective, just grass and wind and sky. In this sleep story, allow the monotony to become a feature, not a flaw. The grass moves in slow, synchronized motion, bending and rising as if breathing. Nature sounds for sleep begin here, not bird song alone, but wind brushing through countless blades, a gentle shh that repeats hour after hour. The oxen walk with patient steadiness, hooves sink slightly into soft earth. The iron-rimmed wheels turn with that same measured creak, 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 a rhythm now so familiar it barely registers. In Oregon Trail history, this sameness tested endurance not through danger, but through constancy. The Great Plains stretched outward in all directions, a vast openness that seemed to erase distance rather than define it. The sky above forms a wide, inverted bowl of blue, so complete and unbroken that it feels architectural. It arches overhead without visible support. Clouds drift slowly, casting shadows that slide across the grass like silent ships. In this relaxing history, nothing demands urgency, nothing interrupts thought. The prairie does not argue, it does not surprise, it simply continues. For families living on the Oregon Trail, this unchanging view became both comfort and challenge. Comfort because predictability calms the mind. Challenge because the human eye searches for variation.
Yet day after day, the daily routine unfolds against the same backdrop. Morning light washing across green, midday sun bleaching color slightly pale, evening gold softening edges before fading into violet. In this boring history for sleep, repetition deepens tranquility. The covered wagon moves as it always does. Wood flexes gently, canvas sways. Flour and bacon remain balanced inside. Children grow used to the horizon never approaching. Adults learn to measure progress not by landmarks, but by time and trust. Great Plains history is often summarized in maps and migration lines, but in lived experience, it was this: grass without end, wind without obstacle, sky without ceiling. The prairie becomes a mirror for patience. Its lack of change invites the mind to slow, to breathe in long intervals, to notice subtle differences instead of dramatic shifts. A slight variation in the color of grass, a faint rise barely perceptible beneath the wheels, a distant herd of bison appearing as dark specks against green, then dissolving into horizon again. Nature sounds for sleep persist steadily: wind, wheel, hoof, breath. And in this sea of green, monotony transforms into meditation. The prairie does not demand attention, it allows it to drift. The wagon continues forward, but the landscape feels suspended in timelessness. And perhaps in this endless grass, families began to understand something unexpected: that movement through sameness can be as powerful as movement through change.
If you remain on the Great Plains long enough, something subtle begins to happen. The mind stops searching for difference. In this continuation of our boring history for sleep, monotony becomes a landscape of its own. The sea of grass does not shift into forests, it does not rise into mountains, it does not narrow into valleys. It continues. And in that continuation, the senses begin to soften. Nature sounds for sleep here are not layered or complex, they are sparse. Wind moving steadily through green blades, the faint brushing rhythm, almost like distant waves folding over themselves. The covered wagon rolls onward, and the sound of its iron-rimmed wheels pressing into soft prairie soil becomes part of the background. Creak, pause, creak, pause. Not loud enough to command attention, only steady enough to reassure it. In Great Plains history, travelers described the horizon as unbroken for days at a time. No fence lines, no buildings, no tall trees to interrupt the meeting of earth and sky. The sky itself feels immense, like an inverted bowl of pale blue glass placed carefully over the world. Clouds drift slowly across it, casting shadows that stretch and dissolve without urgency. In this sleep story, allow your breathing to match that rhythm. Inhale as the grass bends, exhale as it rises. The oxen move forward at their patient pace, their hooves sinking softly into the soil. Even their breathing feels synchronized with the land. Living on the Oregon Trail in this environment meant adapting to vastness. At first, the openness might feel unsettling. There are no walls, no edges, but over time, that absence of interruption becomes calming. The prairie offers no surprises, it offers repetition. The daily routine continues unchanged against this constant view. Morning light, midday warmth, evening gold, nightfall under stars that appear larger because nothing blocks them. In this relaxing history, the lack of variation becomes a lullaby. The prairie schooner sways gently, canvas flutters lightly. The scent of linseed oil drifts faintly whenever wind presses against the bonnet. Dust rises in small clouds beneath wheels, then settles almost immediately, as if even dust respects the quiet here. There are moments when the only sound is wind crossing open land. No rivers nearby,
No forests whispering through leaves, just grass brushing grass, wheel turning, breath steady. In Oregon Trail history, many emigrants later wrote about the mental challenge of the plains, but they also spoke of its strange peace. Without landmarks to anticipate, the mind stops waiting for arrival. It rests inside movement itself. In this boring history for sleep, that is the gift of monotony. The horizon remains exactly where it was yesterday, and the day before, and the week before. Yet the wagon advances mile by mile. Progress exists, even when scenery does not change. The grass sometimes shifts in color under different light, a deeper emerald at dawn, a paler green under noon sun. These subtle changes become meaningful precisely because there is little else to compare them to. A single distant tree appearing briefly on the edge of sight feels almost monumental before dissolving again into openness. Nature sounds for sleep remain constant: wind, wheel, hoof, breath. The repetition is gentle, dependable. And in this endless grass, the prairie teaches a quiet lesson: that stillness and motion can coexist. The wagon moves, the landscape seems still, the sky arches endlessly overhead, and somewhere between wheel and wind, the mind begins to drift, not toward destination, but toward rest.
After days that blur gently into one another across the Great Plains, distance itself begins to feel different. In this final movement of our boring history for sleep within the endless grass, the prairie reveals one of its quietest lessons: that forward motion does not always look like change. The covered wagon continues steadily west, iron-rimmed wheels turning with the same familiar creak, creak, creak against soft earth. The oxen lean into their yokes with patient strength. The daily routine unfolds as it has since independence: 4 a.m. wakefulness, coffee simmering, walking beside the prairie schooner, midday halt, evening camp beneath canvas. Yet the horizon remains unmoved. In Great Plains history, travelers often described this as the illusion of distance. A distant ridge appears on the skyline, small and faint. For hours it seems close enough to reach by afternoon, but as the wagon advances, the ridge remains almost exactly where it was, suspended at the edge of sight. The land stretches so wide and so flat that perspective dissolves. In this sleep story, allow that illusion to soften your sense of urgency. The prairie does not promise arrival, it offers continuation. Nature sounds for sleep remain constant, unbroken by dramatic shifts. Wind brushes across grass with the same whisper as yesterday. Hooves press into soil with the same muted rhythm. The wheels rotate in steady repetition. Creak, pause, creak, pause. The sky above, that vast inverted bowl of blue, shifts only in subtle gradients, from pale morning light to bright noon, from golden evening to deep violet night. Nothing rushes, nothing insists. Living on the Oregon Trail meant adjusting not only to physical labor, but to this psychological stretching of space. Without trees to measure passing ground, without hills to climb and descend, the mind must trust that movement is real even when change is invisible. The covered wagon becomes the only reference point. Wood beneath your hand, canvas overhead, iron at the rim. The world may look the same, but the wagon advances mile by mile. In Oregon Trail history, this illusion could unsettle some, but for others it became a source of unexpected calm. When the landscape does not compete for attention, the senses turn inward. Breathing becomes more noticeable. The rhythm of steps becomes almost musical. Children begin inventing quiet games while walking,
counting clouds that drift slowly across the sky. Adults measure progress not by landmarks, but by days completed. One more sunrise behind them, one more sunset ahead. In this relaxing history, monotony deepens into meditation. A distant herd of bison might appear briefly, dark shapes shimmering against green, then fade into the grass as if absorbed by it. A lone cottonwood near a distant creek might stand as a rare vertical interruption, only to vanish hours later behind the curve of earth. These small variations feel profound precisely because they are rare. Great Plains history teaches that vastness can erase urgency. The land does not compress time, it stretches it gently. The covered wagon continues its steady progress, materials responding softly to motion. Hickory spokes flex, oak hubs turn, iron rims hold fast, canvas shifts lightly in the wind. Everything behaves as it did yesterday. Everything will behave the same tomorrow. In this boring history for sleep, the illusion of distance becomes a lullaby. You are moving even when the world appears still. The grass ripples endlessly like ocean waves, yet the sea never breaks to shore. The sky arches overhead without visible edge, and somewhere within that repetition, the mind releases its need for visible milestones. The prairie does not hurry you, it invites you to match its pace, slow, even, measured, mile after mile, day after day, wheel turn after wheel turn. And as the sun lowers once again over the endless grass, the horizon remains where it has always been, quietly teaching that progress is sometimes felt, not seen.
And just when the endless grass begins to feel permanent, the land does something gentle and unexpected. It lowers, it widens, it shimmers. In this next chapter of our boring history for sleep, the steady rhythm of wheels over prairie earth meets something new, something fluid. Sometimes the trail met the water, and when it did, the soundscape shifted. Not dramatically, not violently, but softly. The Platte River stretched before them, broad and shallow, glinting beneath the immense bowl of sky that had followed them for weeks across the Great Plains history. In this calm history story, we do not rush the crossing. We approach it slowly. The prairie schooner rolls toward the riverbank, iron-rimmed wheels pressing into softer soil. The familiar creak, creak, creak begins to mingle with something different. The hush of river sounds brushing against sand and reeds. The wind that once moved through grass now skims across water, changing its tone from whispering green to whispering blue. Living on the Oregon Trail meant accepting that the land would occasionally offer resistance. Yet the Platte River, often described in Oregon Trail history as wide but rarely deep, did not roar, it did not surge, it flowed, broad and patient. Its surface shimmered like woven silk beneath sunlight. Families paused at the bank, not in panic, but in preparation. The daily routine adjusted gently. Loads were checked again, canvas covers tightened, loose items secured inside the covered wagon. In this sleep story, imagine the quiet concentration rather than fear. Hands pressing against wooden frames, feeling the grain beneath fingertips. The oxen brought forward carefully, their hooves stepping into cool shallows with deliberate calm. The first touch of water against wood produces a sound unlike anything heard on the plains. A soft lapping, a low rhythmic tap as small waves meet oak boards. River sounds for sleep replace the endless wind for a time. The wagon, which had been a house on wheels, now becomes almost a boat. The iron rims, so firm against dry earth, disappear beneath gentle currents. Water curls around spokes, flowing through them without hurry. The oxen step deeper,
their bodies steady, their breathing slow and visible in small ripples around their heads. In this calm history story, we transform danger into drift. The river is cool against skin warmed by days of sun. The scent changes. Instead of dust and linseed oil alone, there is moisture, freshness, the subtle mineral fragrance of moving water. Children fall quiet, watching the surface ripple against the wagon's sides. Adults remain composed, voices low and even. Oregon Trail history records many river crossings as moments of risk, yet most were undertaken with patience rather than panic. The Platte, especially, was known as a mile wide and an inch deep, though that description was sometimes exaggerated. In this relaxing history, we allow the crossing to feel buoyant, floating, drifting. The wheels no longer grind into soil, they glide through liquid resistance. The Prairie schooner sways gently, not from ruts, but from current. The sky remains vast overhead, mirrored faintly in the water below. Wind continues, but softer now, meeting river sounds in a blended harmony. The daily routine bends but does not break. Step by step becomes splash by splash. And as the wagon advances slowly through the Platte River, the sensation shifts from endurance to suspension. For a brief moment, movement feels almost effortless. The land has given way to water, and the trail, instead of ending, simply continues beneath the surface.
Once the wheels leave the firmness of earth entirely, and the wagon settles into the shallow current, a new rhythm takes over. In this continuation of our boring history for sleep, the Prairie's steady repetition gives way to the slow persuasion of water. The Platte River does not rush them. It carries a softness that contrasts with the long endurance of the plains. River sounds for sleep rise gently around the covered wagon, lapping, brushing, folding against wood. The oxen continue forward, their broad shoulders parting the current in quiet arcs. Each breath they release forms small ripples that widen and disappear. The Prairie schooner, so accustomed to dust and ruts, now feels buoyed, almost weightless for a fleeting moment. In Great Plains history, river crossings could be moments of genuine danger, but here we allow the scene to unfold as safe danger, controlled, deliberate, calm. The water is cool, embracing iron rims and oak spokes alike. It presses lightly against the wheels, creating a muted resistance rather than a jolt. Inside the wagon, flour sacks remain steady, sugar wrapped carefully, bacon secured as before. The geometry of preparation from earlier chapters holds firm even here. In this calm history story, preparation transforms risk into rhythm. Listen closely to the soundscape shift. Instead of wind sweeping through endless grass, there is the soft percussion of current against wood. Instead of hooves thudding on soil, there is the muted splash of legs moving through shallows. The sky remains vast overhead, reflected now in fractured blues beneath the wagon. Light shimmers across the surface, scattering into patterns that dance against the canvas underside. Children might watch these reflections silently, mesmerized by how sunlight bends when meeting water. Adults stand with steady hands on wooden frames, feeling the subtle sway. The daily routine pauses here, not to break, but to float. The Platte River, broad and often forgiving, allows wagons to move slowly across its width. The crossing does not require haste, it requires balance. In Oregon Trail history, emigrants learned to read currents carefully, to select shallow stretches, to guide animals without panic. That quiet expertise becomes part of this sleep story. The oxen's breathing remains steady, a slow inhale, a measured exhale. The river reaches only to their flanks in most places, and they step forward with patient confidence. Their strength is not dramatic, it is consistent. The wheels turn through water with less friction than on soil, yet the sensation is heavier, more deliberate. The covered wagon tilts slightly as current nudges one side, then rights itself. The movement is gentle, almost like rocking, floating, drifting. For those inside, the shift in sound is profound. River sounds for sleep wrap around the wagon's wooden frame, creating a cocoon of liquid hush. Even the wind seems to lower its voice here. The scent of moisture rises more distinctly now, mingling with canvas and linseed oil. The air feels cooler against skin. After days of sun on open prairie, this coolness feels restorative. In this relaxing history, the river does not interrupt the journey, it enriches it. The land that seemed endless now offers a mirror. The sky's vast bowl appears doubled, above and below. For a few suspended minutes, the Oregon Trail feels less like endurance and more like glide. The wagon is no longer merely crossing land, it is sharing space with water. The gentle current hums softly around spokes and axles, and as the prairie waits quietly on the far bank, the family advances without hurry, trusting preparation, trusting rhythm, trusting that even movement through water can be calm.
Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the current weakens beneath the wheels. In this final movement of our calm history story, the gentle suspension of water begins to give way once more to the firmness of land. The Platte River, which moments ago cradled the prairie schooner in its cool embrace, grows shallower with each steady step of the oxen. River sounds for sleep soften from surrounding hush to subtle trailing murmurs behind the wagon. The iron rims brush against pebbled ground beneath the surface, producing a faint grinding note that signals transition. Not abrupt, not jarring, simply a return. In Oregon Trail history, these moments, when wheels touched soil again, were quiet confirmations of preparation well made. The oxen lift their legs slightly higher now, water streaming from their flanks in glistening threads. Each step carries them closer to the far bank, where grasses bend in welcome rather than in endless uniformity. The covered wagon tilts gently forward as front wheels meet packed sand. The sensation shifts. Resistance becomes traction. Floating becomes grounding. Yet the calm does not vanish, it transforms. The daily routine, paused but never broken, resumes its steady shape. Wind begins to speak more clearly again as water's murmur recedes. The prairie's breath replaces the river's whisper. And still, nothing rushes. The family inside the wagon does not cheer loudly. They do not leap in triumph. Instead, there is a quiet exchange of glances, a shared understanding that this safe danger has passed without disruption. In this boring history for sleep, safety feels earned not through drama, but through steadiness. The Platte River lies behind them now, glinting beneath the vast inverted bowl of sky. Its surface returns to unbroken calm as if it had never held a wagon at all. In Great Plains history, such crossings punctuated the journey, offering variation in texture and sound while leaving the broader rhythm intact. The oxen step fully onto dry earth, their hooves pressing firmly once more into soil rather than silt. The wagon follows, wheels emerging from water with a soft suctioning release before turning cleanly on land.
Listen to that subtle shift from splash to crunch, from lapping to creak. The familiar creak of wood against axle resumes its measured cadence. Creak, pause, creak, pause. Nature sounds for sleep return to wind moving through grass, but now the memory of water lingers softly in the mind. The scent changes again, moisture giving way to dust and sun-warmed canvas. Linseed oil mingles faintly with the earthy perfume of prairie soil. Inside the wagon, nothing has shifted out of place. Flour remains stacked, sugar wrapped tight, bacon secured. The geometry of preparation holds true once more. In this relaxing history, the crossing becomes a reminder rather than an interruption. The trail met water. The water was crossed. The trail continues. The horizon, unchanged as ever, waits patiently ahead. And yet something subtle has altered within the travelers. The monotony of endless grass now carries a fresh note, a brief memory of cool current beneath wheels. Living on the Oregon Trail meant accepting these gentle transitions, earth to water, water back to earth, without losing rhythm. The prairie schooner advances once more into green openness. The sky arches wide and forgiving overhead. Wind sweeps through grass with steady persistence. And as evening light begins to stretch long across the plains, the river becomes only a glimmer behind them, absorbed into the wider landscape of repetition. In this sleep story, the far bank is not an ending, it is a continuation. Step by step, mile by mile, wheel turn by wheel turn. The land has changed texture, but not direction. The daily routine resumes its dependable arc. And beneath the vastness of Great Plains history, calm settles once again, not because danger never existed, but because it passed quietly, carried away on the same gentle current that once surrounded the wagon, and now flows softly behind it.
And as the memory of river water fades into the quiet distance behind them, the light begins to change once more. In this next chapter of our boring history for sleep, the vastness of the prairie slowly gathers inward. The endless horizon softens. The wind lowers its voice. The day, which began with measured footsteps and iron wheels turning west, now bends gently toward rest. As the sun dips low, the wagons begin to form a circle. Not hurried, not commanded, simply understood. In Oregon Trail history, this nightly arrangement was both practical and symbolic. The covered wagons, those wooden homes that carried flour, bacon, sugar, tools, quilts, and hope, draw closer together. Wheel to wheel, canvas to canvas, a fortress of wood and fabric takes shape against the open plains. In this bedtime story for adults, allow the image to settle in your mind. The prairie schooners standing shoulder to shoulder, enclosing a safe interior space where the day's labor dissolves into warmth. The circle of safety is not built of stone, but of repetition and trust. The oxen are unyoked carefully, their heavy wooden harnesses lifted away with practiced motions. Iron fittings click softly as they are set aside. The animals wander just beyond the ring, grazing under watchful but untroubled eyes. Inside the circle, small fires begin to appear. At first, a spark, then a flame, then the gentle crackle that becomes one of the most recognizable campfire sounds in human history. In Great Plains history, evening was not a spectacle, it was a ritual.
and rituals soothe the mind. Listen to the fire take hold of kindling, the low snap of dry twigs, the soft collapse of bark curling inward. Smoke rises in thin blue threads, drifting upward into a sky now brushed with gold and amber. The scent changes again, from dust and river and grass to wood smoke and baking bread. Dutch ovens are placed carefully among coals, their lids dusted lightly with ash to hold steady heat. Inside them, dough rises and browns slowly. The aroma of warm bread begins to mingle with the evening air, creating something unmistakably human against the vast prairie. In this relaxing history, the day's monotony gives way to comfort without breaking rhythm. Voices murmur in low conversation, no shouting, no urgency, just the gentle exchange of observations, how the river crossing went smoothly, how tomorrow's path appears level, how the oxen held steady. Children sit close to the flames, watching sparks drift upward like tiny stars returning to the sky. The covered wagons, arranged in their circle, block the wind just enough to make the air inside warmer. Canvas rustles softly, but no longer in isolation. It moves within community. In Oregon Trail history, the evening camp was the golden hour of the journey. Work was done. Miles were counted silently. The prairie beyond the circle remains immense and unknowable, but within this ring of wood and canvas, there is certainty. The daily routine finds its gentle conclusion. Boots are loosened, hands are washed with careful economy of water, quilts are shaken free of dust and laid ready for night. Campfire sounds for sleep continue steadily, crackle, pop, settle, forming a rhythmic backdrop that calms the nervous system after long hours of motion. The sky darkens gradually, not abruptly. Blue deepens into indigo. The first stars appear, mirrored faintly in memory from the river just past. The circle holds firm, not as a barricade, but as an embrace. In this bedtime story for adults, feel the transition from movement to stillness. The prairie has not changed in size, the journey has not shortened, but inside the circle, something shifts. Safety becomes tangible, warmth becomes visible. And as bread bakes and firelight flickers against wagon wheels, the vastness of the Oregon Trail shrinks to the comforting diameter of a shared camp.
Once the circle has fully formed and the fires settle into steady embers, the prairie no longer feels infinite. In this continuation of our boring history for sleep, the world contracts gently into a space defined not by miles, but by warmth. The covered wagons stand as quiet guardians, their wooden frames catching the glow of flame light, their canvas bonnets reflecting soft amber tones. Beyond them, the Great Plains stretch endlessly, but inside the ring there is enclosure, there is intention. There is the unmistakable sensation of being held. In Oregon Trail history, the circle of wagons served many purposes: organization, protection, order. But in this bedtime story for adults, it becomes something deeper: the architecture of comfort. Campfire sounds for sleep begin to layer softly over the quiet evening. The steady crackle of wood releasing stored sunlight, the gentle collapse of glowing coals as they shift inward. Occasionally, a spark rises and fades into the darkening air. These small sounds replace the long creak of wheels and the hush of river current. The nervous system, once tuned to motion and watchfulness, begins to ease.
The oxen lie down just beyond the perimeter, their large bodies forming calm silhouettes against the twilight. Their breathing is slow and heavy, not strained. The animals trust the circle as much as the people do. The Dutch ovens are lifted carefully from coals, lids tilted to release a breath of fragrant steam. The scent of bread, browned and warm, drifts across the enclosed space. Someone breaks a loaf open with steady hands, steam curling upward into the cooling air. In Great Plains history, these small meals were simple, measured, and shared. There was no excess, yet there was enough. In this calm history story, enough becomes abundance. The circle of safety does not depend on walls of stone or iron. It depends on proximity. Wagon to wagon, family to family, fire to fire. Conversations remain low and rhythmic, blending into the background like an extension of campfire sounds. Stories from earlier trails are retold. Observations about tomorrow's route are exchanged quietly. Laughter, when it comes, is soft and brief, dissolving easily into the open night. The sky above darkens slowly, transforming from gold to deep blue to velvet black. Stars appear gradually, one at a time, as if reluctant to interrupt the warmth below. The daily routine, which began before dawn, now concludes with predictable grace. Boots are set neatly beside wagon steps. Tools are gathered and placed where they can be found again at first light. Quilts are drawn from inside the covered wagons, shaken gently to release dust from the day's travel. In Oregon Trail history, routine was survival, but here, routine becomes comfort. The wagon's circular formation reduces wind just enough that the air inside remains still and warm. The fires glow steadily at the center, radiating a softness that contrasts with the vast, cool prairie beyond. For a moment, the journey feels paused rather than progressing. The land outside the circle remains immense and unknown, but within this wooden boundary, everything is known. Every face is familiar. Every sound is recognized. Campfire sounds for sleep continue to anchor the atmosphere. Crackle, settle, whisper. The rhythm is slow, dependable, almost hypnotic. In this bedtime story for adults, the evening camp is not merely a stopping point, it is the emotional heart of the trail. It is where labor dissolves into belonging, where distance dissolves into closeness, where the prairie's endless horizon narrows into a ring of shared light. And as the bread is eaten, as voices fade into softer murmurs, as the fire settles deeper into glowing coals, the circle holds firm, not as a barricade against danger, but as an embrace against the vastness. As the fires settle into their final glow, and conversation fades into softer murmurs, the evening camp enters its most intimate hour. In this final movement of our boring history for sleep, warmth shifts from flame to fabric. The circle of safety remains firm outside, but inside each covered wagon, a quieter circle forms, one made of quilts, breath, and shared stillness. In Oregon Trail history, sleep was not a luxury, it was necessity. Yet within the Prairie schooner, beneath layered blankets stitched back east and carried across miles of grass and river, rest becomes something more than recovery. It becomes belonging. The campfire sounds for sleep continue faintly outside, an occasional crackle, a low settling of embers, but they now feel distant, like a heartbeat heard through walls. Inside the wagon, The wooden frame creaks gently as bodies shift into comfortable positions. Canvas above holds the night air at bay, filtering wind into a muted whisper. The scent of smoke lingers lightly in cloth fibers, mingling with warm bread and the faint sweetness of dry grass carried in on boots. In this bedtime story for adults, allow the scene to narrow gently. A child curls beside a flour sack that once seemed heavy, but now feels like part of the wagon's architecture. A parent pulls a quilt closer, its patchwork squares a reminder of homes far behind. The prairie beyond remains vast and unknowable, but inside this wooden boundary, everything is measured and known. Great Plains history often focuses on distance traveled, rivers crossed, mountains reached. Yet much of life on the Oregon Trail unfolded in these small interiors, under canvas, beneath stars, within circles of safety. The daily routine that structured the day now softens into repetition of another kind. Breath in, breath out. The wagon shifts almost imperceptibly as night air cools wood and iron alike. Outside, oxen breathe slowly, their large forms resting in patient silhouettes beyond the ring of wagons. Nature sounds for sleep blend subtly here, the wind brushing grass, the last quiet pop of embers, a distant coyote call carried lightly across open land, not threatening, simply present. Inside, the mind no longer measures miles, it measures comfort. The iron rims that ground through soil and water earlier now cool silently beneath moonlight. The Dutch ovens, once fragrant with bread, rest near fading coals. Tools are stacked neatly. Boots sit where they will be found before dawn. In this calm history story, nothing is urgent, nothing demands attention. The prairie has surrendered to night. The sky above, that vast inverted bowl, fills with stars so numerous they seem to spill toward the horizon. Through a small gap in canvas, a sliver of starlight might enter the wagon's interior, tracing faint lines along quilt edges. Living on the Oregon Trail required resilience, but resilience does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers in the way families arranged themselves to fit within narrow wooden frames. It whispers in the way they trusted the circle of wagons outside to guard against unseen dangers. It whispers in the way sleep arrived despite uncertainty. In this relaxing history, the monotony of the plains becomes a cradle. The circle of safety does not vanish when eyes close, it deepens. Breath steadies, muscles release the memory of walking. The covered wagon, once creaking through miles of grass and river, now rests in perfect stillness. The work was done. The river was crossed. The endless grass lay quiet beyond the circle, and beneath layered quilts, with campfire sounds fading into ember hush, the promise of rest is fulfilled. Not dramatic, not triumphant, simply warm, simply safe, simply enough.
After many nights beneath quilts and many mornings of measured footsteps beside iron-rimmed wheels, something new begins to rise from the sameness of the plains. In this next movement of our boring history for sleep, the endless grass does not disappear, but it gains a companion. At first, it is only a faint interruption on the horizon, a vertical suggestion against the wide, inverted bowl of sky. Days turn into weeks on the Oregon Trail, and for long stretches, the only markers of time are sunrise and sunset. Yet now, in the far distance, there is a form that does not drift like cloud or ripple like grass. It stands. Chimney Rock. In this educational sleep story, we do not approach it quickly. We let it reveal itself gradually, as it did to those traveling west in the 1840s.
For days before you reached it, Chimney Rock was visible, a pale spire rising like a needle from flat earth. It did not hurry closer. It did not seem to grow in proportion to the wagon's advance. It remained constant, unmoving, as if time itself had chosen a shape. In Great Plains history, landmarks like Chimney Rock and Scott's Bluff were more than geological formations. They were psychological anchors. In a landscape defined by monotony, these silent stones offered reassurance that progress was real. The covered wagon rolls forward, creaking softly, and the daily routine continues unchanged. Coffee at dawn, walking beside the Prairie schooner, midday rest, evening circle. Yet now there is a presence on the horizon that watches without blinking. In this calm history story, imagine Chimney Rock not as a dramatic monument, but as a giant asleep on the prairie. Its narrow tower, shaped by wind and time, resembles a finger pointing upward, or perhaps the chimney of a forgotten stone house left behind by the earth itself. The oxen move steadily, unaware of the rock's significance, their breath rising in quiet rhythm. The iron rims turn as always, but the human eye returns again and again to that distant spire. In Oregon Trail history, emigrants wrote in diaries of the thrill of first sighting Chimney Rock, not because it signaled arrival, but because it broke the uniformity. For weeks, the horizon had been a line without punctuation. Now it carried a mark. The sky arches overhead, vast and blue, while the rock stands silent beneath it. The prairie wind continues its whisper through grass, nature sounds for sleep blending with the soft creak of wood. The rock neither advances nor retreats. It remains a constant companion, visible for days before you reached it and days after you passed it. That constancy is what transforms it into comfort. In this bedtime story for adults, the landmark becomes a witness. It stands as the slow procession of history drifts by, wagon after wagon, family after family, each believing their journey unique, yet all moving beneath the same stone gaze. Chimney Rock does not speak, it does not instruct, it simply stands, and in its silence the travelers find orientation. The monotony of grass no longer feels infinite, it feels measured between one stone and the next. The daily routine unfolds beneath its watchful presence, and for the first time in many days, the horizon feels less abstract. There is a shape to move toward, a silent companion against the sky.
For days, the shape on the horizon remains unchanged, and yet, almost without noticing, it grows. In this continuation of our boring history for sleep, the silent landmark that once seemed a thin suggestion against the sky now begins to take on depth and shadow. Chimney Rock no longer appears as a distant line, it stands as a presence. In this educational sleep story, we approach it not with urgency, but with patience. The covered wagon rolls steadily across the plains, iron rims pressing softly into earth, while the daily routine unfolds as always. Coffee at dawn, walking beside the Prairie schooner, midday rest beneath the open sky. Yet the eye is drawn forward. The giant asleep on the prairie slowly awakens in detail. Its dais widens. Its sides show subtle striations carved by wind over centuries. In Great Plains history, travelers often described the way Chimney Rock seemed to hover above the land, visible long before its scale could be understood. Now, as the wagon draws nearer, the illusion shifts. The rock is no longer a needle alone. It is a tower rooted deeply in time.
In Oregon Trail history, landmarks like Scotts Bluff and Chimney Rock served as confirmation that the journey had substance. Weeks of monotony are now measured in stone rather than grass. The oxen step forward calmly, indifferent to geological grandeur, their breath rising in quiet clouds against afternoon light. The prairie wind continues its steady whisper, nature sounds for sleep blending with the low creak of wooden axles. And as the wagon advances, the silent giant grows large enough to cast faint shadows across the land. Imagine it as a sentinel that has watched countless wagon trains drift westward, a stone witness to hope, fatigue, resilience. In this calm history story, the act of passing becomes ceremonial. The wagons do not stop for long, yet their movement feels marked. Families glance upward, tracing the height of the spire against blue sky. Some carve their names into nearby rocks, leaving faint signatures that future travelers will read. In this bedtime story for adults, the landmark becomes more than geography, it becomes memory. The rock stands unmoving while lives move beneath it. The circle of safety that forms each evening now feels framed by something enduring. When night falls near Chimney Rock, the silhouette looms gently against starlight, resembling a giant figure resting upright. Campfire sounds for sleep flicker at its base, small flames dwarfed by the silent mass of stone. The daily routine continues, but now it carries a sense of milestone. The prairie no longer feels endless, it feels navigable. In Great Plains history, such landmarks reassured emigrants that they were on the correct path. The Oregon Trail was not a straight line drawn on a map, it was a sequence of remembered shapes. And as the wagons pass the rock, visible still behind them for days after, the giant resumes its role as distant companion. Passing does not diminish it, it transforms it into memory. The covered wagon creaks forward, the horizon opens again into grass and sky, but something subtle has shifted. The monotony now holds punctuation. The journey now has chapters written in stone. And the giant, once ahead, now behind, remains silent as ever, watching history drift slowly by. After Chimney Rock has faded into memory and settled gently behind the wagon train, the horizon does not return to emptiness. In this final movement of our educational sleep story, another form begins to gather shape from the distance. It is broader, heavier, less like a needle and more like a sleeping fortress, Scotts Bluff. In Oregon Trail history, it stood as one of the most reassuring landmarks along the route, a vast stone presence rising from the plains of Nebraska. In this boring history for sleep, we do not rush toward it. We allow the monotony to continue, because monotony is the rhythm that carries rest. The covered wagon moves at its faithful pace, iron rims pressing softly into soil, wood whispering its familiar creak. The daily routine remains unchanged: dawn coffee, careful packing, measured steps beside oxen, evening circle of safety. Yet once again the eye lifts. The bluff appears gradually, its layered cliffs catching light differently at different hours of day. In Great Plains history, Scotts Bluff was described as a gateway. Though no gate existed, it was simply stone, layered and patient, shaped by ancient rivers long before wagons ever traced the trail. In this calm history story, imagine the bluff as a giant reclining along the earth, its broad shoulders resting beneath sky. Unlike Chimney Rock's vertical elegance, Scotts Bluff spreads wide, offering not a point, but a wall. And yet it is silent, always silent. For travelers, this educational sleep story of stone was not about drama, but orientation. To see Scotts Bluff meant that progress was measurable. The prairie no longer felt endless, but structured, punctuated by earth itself. The oxen continue their steady breathing, nature sounds for sleep blending with distant wind. Children in wagons peer upward at cliffs that seem impossibly tall after weeks of flat horizon. Some travelers detour slightly to pass closer to study the rock face etched with erosion lines like wrinkles of age. Others remain on the established path, content to let the bluff remain a companion at distance. In this bedtime story for adults, the landmark becomes a guardian. It does not protect in a physical sense, yet its scale creates reassurance. The circle of safety each night, formed by wagons, now rests in the shadow of something ancient and unmoving. Campfire sounds for sleep flicker softly while the stone silhouette stands against twilight. The monotony that once threatened to dissolve perception now feels purposeful. In Oregon Trail history, emigrants carved names into Independence Rock and wrote in diaries of passing Scotts Bluff, marking their existence against permanence. The stone watched silently as wagon after wagon rolled by, carrying hopes westward. It neither approved nor denied, it simply endured. And that endurance is what settles the mind. In this final cadence of Chapter 7, we understand that these landmarks were not destinations, but companions. They measured time without clocks. They marked distance without maps. The covered wagon continues forward, and eventually Scotts Bluff too recedes into the background, shrinking slowly until it becomes another shape absorbed by sky. Yet something remains. The prairie, once infinite, now feels familiar. The horizon no longer threatens with sameness because memory has filled it with giants. In this boring history for sleep, stone becomes storyteller. Without speaking, it narrates resilience. Without moving, it confirms movement. And as night falls once more upon the Oregon Trail, beneath stars scattered like quiet lanterns, the traveler rests knowing that silent landmarks still stand behind and ahead, watching history drift gently through time.
And after the silent stones have watched you pass, after the rivers have carried you gently, after the prairie has stretched endlessly beneath your wheels, the land begins to change once more. In this final chapter of our boring history for sleep, the air grows softer. The horizon lifts into rolling green. The Willamette Valley. In Oregon Trail history, this valley was more than geography. It was a promise fulfilled slowly, breath by breath. The covered wagon does not rush into it. The daily routine continues even now. Morning light, steady oxen, quiet footsteps. But something within the traveler shifts. There is moisture in the soil. Trees return to the landscape, tall and reassuring. The endless grass that once defined Great Plains history gives way to fertile fields and gentle rivers. In this educational sleep story, we do not describe triumph loudly. We let it unfold softly. The wheels which have turned for months begin to slow. The iron rims press into richer earth. The creak, creak, creak that once echoed across open plains now feels absorbed by the valley's green embrace. In this calm history story, imagine the moment not as celebration, but as release. The oxen are unyoked for what may be the last time. Their shoulders, once bearing wooden weight, now lower gently. The prairie schooner, faithful companion, stands still. In Oregon Trail history, arrival did not erase hardship, but it offered rest. And rest after such movement becomes sacred. In this bedtime story for adults, the first fire in a permanent hearth is lit.
Not beneath canvas, not inside a circle of wagons, but within walls that will not move at dawn. The smell of wood smoke rises differently now, steady, rooted. The daily routine dissolves into something quieter. No more breaking camp at sunrise. No more scanning horizons for landmarks like Chimney Rock or Scott's Bluff. The land itself becomes home. In this gentle sleep meditation, allow your breath to slow with the wagon wheels. They turn once more, then once again, and then they stop. The silence that follows is not emptiness, it is completion. Nature sounds for sleep shift subtly. The rustle of leaves instead of prairie wind, the murmur of a nearby stream instead of distant plains. In this falling asleep fast moment, the mind recognizes safety. The journey is over. The house begins to rise from timber and intention. Hands that once gripped reins now lift beams. The fire is lit in a hearth that will remain through winter and spring. In Oregon Trail history, the Willamette Valley symbolized arrival, but in this story it symbolizes something deeper: stillness after motion. The monotony that once lulled the mind now transforms into stability. In this boring history for sleep, let the history begin to soften at the edges. The wagon stands unmoving beneath trees. The oxen rest. The valley holds you. You are safe. You are home. And as twilight lowers gently over the Willamette, the final chapter prepares not for applause, but for quiet.
And now, as the valley settles around you and the wagon no longer moves, we allow the story itself to slow. In this final descent of our boring history for sleep, there is no more distance to measure, no more rivers to cross, no more landmarks rising on the horizon. The Willamette Valley rests quietly beneath evening light, and you rest with it. In Oregon Trail history, arrival was not a trumpet call, but a gradual softening. The covered wagon stands still beneath tall trees. The oxen breathe slowly, their work complete. The daily routine that once governed every sunrise begins to dissolve into something gentler, less urgent. In this sleep meditation, let your breath follow the rhythm of the valley. Inhale slowly, as if drawing in the scent of damp earth and fresh timber. Exhale gently, as if releasing the months of movement carried within your bones. The hearth inside the newly built home glows steadily, not flickering in wind, not threatened by rain. This fire is permanent. In this bedtime story for adults, permanence becomes the final comfort. The wheels that once turned endlessly across prairie soil now rest against still ground. Listen to the absence of creaking wood. Notice how silence has weight, but not heaviness. It is the kind of silence that signals safety. In Great Plains history, monotony lulled the mind through repetition. Here in the valley, repetition transforms into continuity. Tomorrow there will still be morning light, but there will be no need to pack the wagon. Tomorrow there will still be coffee, but it will be brewed inside walls that do not shift. In this calm history story, the journey does not vanish. It settles into memory, like distant thunder fading beyond hills. Let the nature sounds for sleep grow softer now. The stream nearby murmurs steadily. Leaves brush gently against one another. The fire settles into glowing embers. In this falling asleep fast moment, imagine lying down upon a simple wooden bed beneath a roof that will remain. Your muscles no longer anticipate motion. Your ears no longer scan for danger. The Oregon Trail,
once stretching endlessly westward, narrows into a quiet path behind you. The silent landmarks stand far away now, Chimney Rock, Scott's Bluff, receding into dreamlike distance. In this educational sleep story, history itself begins to dim at the edges. The images blur gently, not disappearing, but softening. The wagon circle fades, the prairie wind quiets, the iron rims cool completely. The firelight lowers until it becomes a steady red glow. You are safe. You are home. In this final breath of our boring history for sleep, allow the voice to grow slower, quieter, like footsteps receding down a wooden hallway. The valley remains, the house remains, the hearth remains, and you remain, resting within it. Let your eyelids grow heavy as the last embers dim. Let the story dissolve into warmth. Let the journey settle into stillness. Sleep now. The wheels have stopped turning. The land holds you. Good night.